Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Therapeutic Thursday with me, John Quick. As you may well know by now, but they keep telling me to say it, that those people upstairs, I am both involved in therapy, but I'm also a long-term aortic dissection survivor. I'm now 18 years out, having had out of the blue a type A ascending dissection which involved came out of the blue, and I had emergency open heart surgery and an artificial metal titanium valve and a prosthesis. And then subsequently, I had a type B descending dissection, which has been, as many of you will know, the strategy medically managed with defensive medication for the last 18 years. I've recently had a scan, which was all very, very stable and encouraging. As a result of this kind of life-changing event, and I know it can be life-changing for all of us, that made me reconsider some of the things I want to do in my life. I'd always been very interested in psychology and done a lot of reading, and I started doing more training, doing various courses, volunteering for organizations, getting up some experience, and I've gradually built my flying hours, if you like, in therapy. So we've been doing these series of interviews now with various people, and today we have a little bit of something different in that for the first time, we have a carer with us, whose name is Mindy, and she is the partner of Rob Seltzer, who is an aortic dissection survivor. And today I'm going to be talking with Mindy very much from the point of view of what it's like to be a carer, what are some of the challenges, how has it changed her life, so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mindy to join me.
You.
Over in Michigan, isn't it?
Michigan,
no, yeah, Michigan, where you've just recently moved.
A month ago.
Yeah, so
with
that's
great
been
angst.
Full on for you. And are you gradually getting straight?
I'm getting there. I mean, I grew up in Michigan.
Yeah.
We've lived in Florida for 37 years.
Wow.
So, our whole social group and everything was all in Florida. So I have to renew friendships, find new friends. And you have the family, the grandkids and everything, but everything else of social is going to take some time.
So that's obviously a massive change for you after 37 years, which in
Absolutely.
itself can have, what is it they say? Well, aortic dissection is probably up there, but they say the two most complex things in life are, well, the three, it's divorce, moving house, and, well, serious illness, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And so how's it all going in terms of energy for you both?
We're both doing really well. We actually, during COVID, he bought me golf lessons because we happen to live across from a golf course in Florida. So we would golf as he got stronger. We would golf, and we only played courses that we could walk on. So he got his exercise as well as while we played. So Tuesday we went to a thing. We have a thing called Top Golf, and it's just tiers of booths and that you can golf, and they have the score pot. So we went there on Tuesday and practiced all our strokes. Great. Yesterday he was tired. I was like, "What would you like to do today?" He says, "I'm doing it." I said, "Okay."
Okay. So moving on then to part of the reason why you're here. You call yourself, you're classified as a carer. Mm-hmm. And that, as I understand it, and we've talked, is about principally looking after Rob with his condition. Can you just run us through a little bit of, what that involves in your life?
Right now, it doesn't involve much. He is pretty stable, and I recognize when something's off with him. He may push it, and I'll say, "You might want to back off." And he's getting much better at recognizing. Like yesterday, he said, "No, I can't do anything today."
So he listens to you then?
He recognizes it himself now.
Okay, which is good.
We have a standard joke. I'm a dietitian. He's a chef. And it's, yes, butcher knife's at the jugular. No butter. No, we used to fight. No butter, no salt. He goes, You can't do anything without flavor. So the dissection made him start listening to me
Hmm.
when
Now,
it came to
this
that.
dissection happened, it was, I think, 3 years ago,
Three
wasn't it?
years ago.
Yes. So that was
And
obviously a life-changing event for you
oh,
both
it was
out of the
very
blue.
traumatic for me. I happened to be up in Michigan
Hmm.
visiting with the grandkids. I had literally just hung up the phone with him. And 15 minutes later, I got a phone call saying, "Are you not in a car?" from my daughter up here. And I said, "No, I'm at my friend's house." She goes, "We think Dad's had a heart attack. He's on his way to the hospital." So I'm up here not knowing what's going on. And it was very stressful.
Yes, I can imagine. That sent that distance not helping one little bit.
But he did call me from the ambulance.
Yes.
So the paramedics were able to tell me, they said, "Something's wrong. It's not a heart attack. Um, he's talking to us. He's lucid." And from that point forward, my younger daughter that lived with us, who lives in Florida, she followed him to the hospital.
Okay.
So he had his phone next to him, so we were all communicating and knowing what was going on. But
Hmm.
the doctors were not listening, and it's very frustrating because they treated him with medications for a heart attack twice, and nothing changed. So in other words, he was continuing to dissect
Right.
from the initial dissection, and my daughter's yelling at him, and I finally just yelled at him and saying, asked him specific lab values, what was his kinase levels and what was his forgot what it was.
So she
But
knew enough to ask those kind of
I
questions.
did.
Oh, right.
At 10 o'clock when the doctor came in, I asked him what those values were. And
Good for you.
from that point forward, they finally sent him to the CT. So he had been in the emergency room for 2.5 hours before they did the CAT scan,
In a lot of pain.
in a lot of pain. And this man shows no pain, but I could hear the pain over the phone. So it was rough.
Yes. As you're saying that, I feel the trigger of that going through
Yeah,
me of a similar kind of memory.
yeah.
Yes.
And
Um. So you then presumably hopped on a plane as soon as you could, no?
right, we got a flight out at 8 o'clock in the morning. And right before we got on the plane, the hospital called and said, "He's getting ready for surgery." And by the time we landed, they called us again and told us that surgery was progressing. They had started the procedure, and that was about 9:30. And my daughter wanted to come up right away, go to the hospital, because we had a 2.5 hour drive to the hospital. They had to life flight
Oof.
him to a hospital because even though we have great thoracic in Orlando, they couldn't do what he had.
Right.
Um, so I said, "No, no, I just need to calm down. I need to take the dog for a walk." And without telling her, I went and called my cardiologist, his cardiologist.
So
You
a
know,
couple of things to notice there. You were doing well to manage your emotions, weren't you?
at
So
that
you
time, yeah.
knew for yourself that what you needed to do first of all was get yourself together, sort of literally land
Hmm.
and take the dog for a walk.
Right. Um, and then called the cardiologist while I was walking the dog and told him what was happening. And he said he couldn't be in better hands. So that
Hmm.
was a relief. Um, as we were driving, because my daughter took a nap because we had been up all night. So when we started driving, about an hour outside the hospital, the surgeon called and told us he was out of surgery and everything had gone well. And the only thing we have to watch for now is strokes at this point.
Okay. Hmm.
So we were okay with that. And she was smart enough because you're not processing everything. I was driving because that gave me control.
So you found that useful for you to kind of because driving and things like that can just force us to
Focus
be
on the
focused,
driving,
can't
not
they?
worrying about what's going on with him.
Right.
And so she took her phone out and recorded the conversation that we had in the car with the doctor.
Smart move. Yeah.
So we could listen to it later and know exactly what he did.
Mm.
Otherwise, it would have just been a mishmash. And it worked out really well because we were able to listen to it and understand a little bit clearer. Because he talked to us for about 10 minutes.
It's very useful to have somebody else with us in those kind of situations, isn't it? Because
Absolutely.
it's another ear, it's another eye.
Yeah.
We can get very caught up in the emotion of it. And
Yeah.
yes,
She had to kick me out of his room one day because I would sleep with him because I need to know what's going on. And we had a hotel. The campus has a hotel because it was at a university, and they have a hotel that you can walk to from the hospital. And she
okay,
finally said, "Mom, you need to go in the afternoon. Go home and go to sleep. I'll be here." So we did. And then they made me a bed because they have beds in all the ICU rooms. So I stayed with them.
right.
And
So, Mindy, in the following days, and that's obviously when you sort of immediately became a carer.
right.
What were some of the challenges that you
Well,
both faced, and you faced, and he faced, and
I remember he woke up and he goes, "I love you so much."
mm,
Excuse me.
that's
Um,
fine. That's lovely to hear.
and he sort of knew what happened, but not quite. And he was still intubated. And I know too much medically. So I
Mm,
was reading everything, the 8 IVs that were going into him and everything, and looking at what's going on. So he was doing pretty well for the most part. I think the third day, they finally had got him out of bed um, and put him in a chair, the respiratory, and it's funny when he comes to things because the respiratory therapist came in and put the mask on because he uses the CPAP, so and they had it at so much pressure, he just ripped it off and says, "I am refusing treatment. Give me a piece of paper and I'll sign that I'm refusing treatment, but you will not do this to me again." So, give him the right thing, he's fine. And my younger daughter, it took her a few days to come up. And so she brought his CPAP from home. And he goes, "I will use my CPAP every night, but I'm not going to use your stuff." I said, "Fine, and I will argue the point for you. You know your body." Um, and he did well. We had him walking by day 4 or 5 down the
okay.
hallway, and
So,
then
you're giving me the impression of a person, Rob, who he's pretty certain about what he wants. He's not afraid to assert himself.
no, and he was able to assert himself. I know there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that we talk to that are not able to communicate after what goes on,
Yes. Well,
whether
I
they're
also wondered whether when you were saying that, whether, because I remember I was saying some crazy stuff on the morphine, whether that was partly, drug induced.
oh, saying "I love you." I don't know. No,
No, no, I don't mean that. No.
we've been together a little bit too long for that.
No, I meant, regarding the treatment and ripping the
No,
mask off.
no, he was. They put a full mask on his face,
Yeah.
and he uses the CPAP with the nasal thing, and they had the pressure. I think they said they had it at like 60 or 70% oxygen, which they tend
Mm.
to do.
Yes,
Um,
I had it done to me.
but he couldn't handle it. He was totally uncomfortable with it. So he just
Mm.
ripped it off and he says, "Whatever you need to do, fine, but I'm not using what you're doing."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, and then he was, as you all know, with all the medications, you don't have proper bowel movements or everything. And so they were at the point to send him for an x-ray to see if he had an ileus, which is when the intestines stop functioning and they
Hmm.
have to go in and take that portion out. And I said, "No." I said, "You're not opening them again. Let's try other resources first before we jump to that." So the nurse says, "Okay, I'm going to make this cocktail of everything that you could possibly use to help you go to the bathroom." And, he went into AFib because of that,
Was that
because of the
what, because of the
constipation,
cocktail or because of not being able to go to the toilet?
not going to the toilet.
Mm.
So he was in AFib for 22 hours. which is a very long time.
Not nice.
And
Mm.
she said we're going to have to do something, and well, his body decided to do something. So it worked out
I
okay.
didn't actually know about that connection between not being able to go to the toilet and AFib,
Yeah.
but I had AFib, and actually now you're talking, it makes me think, hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, well, because you don't realize how much the intestines, you've heard of the brain gut
Yeah.
connection,
Oh, yeah,
and they're
absolutely.
talking about the gut being a second brain.
Yeah.
And it is. It really, when you read
Oh,
enough of
God,
the
work a lot
information,
with those kind of ideas. Yes.
yeah, it really is and has an impact on your whole system.
Well, and it's also a huge holder of shock.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is what, and very, very related to irritable bowel syndrome. I don't know whether you call it
correct.
that in the States, IBS.
Yes, IBS is the same.
We're generally often anxiety, emotion-driven conditions.
Right. It triggers the conditions there, but it triggers the side
Mm,
effects of the IBS more than
yeah.
creating the IBS. But he did well, and he's always had a little issue with bathroom conditions. So I put him on fiber 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and so he's been doing pretty good overall. And he had setbacks. Luckily, in Florida, we have a tremendous support group of friends. They came over. They helped me get him up to walk him down the street. There was three of us, one on each side and one behind him before the home health came. So we
Because
had
he's
him up.
not a small guy, is he, from what I can see?
No, no.
Mm,
So three of us managed to walk him two or three houses, and then we said, okay, you could feel him not being so stable. Turn around, let's go back. And the next day he only made it down the driveway, which our driveway is like a 40-degree angle. So just going up and
mm,
down the driveway is enough to wear anyone out.
yeah.
And home health came and said, do your laps around the house for 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And he continued that. And he paid very much attention to what was going on. Within the week we were home, um, he scheduled an appointment with a psychologist.
Okay.
Um, and we both went together. And she says, okay, let me tell you this. You have PTS, but I can't treat you because we're friends. So I'll give you a referral. And I, working for the government, we have and it's like the employee helpline. So I could call a counselor and talk to them for 15 minutes, and they
All
could tell
right.
you if you need more counseling. My kids came, you need
Mm.
counseling, you need counseling. And I don't share with them that I did that.
So what was the first your friend counselor? What did she pick up straight away as PTS then?
um, Almost that I was hovering, that afraid to let him do anything without me being right next to him. And
Okay.
you have to back off and you have to let him make his decisions. And I did one more session and I said, okay, I got it. I mean, I've worked with enough geriatric patients for 22 years and psychological patients and with my job. So I said, okay, well, do the same thing you do with them at home. Treat him with respect and not just my lover that I want to make sure does everything right. So,
Yes.
and then um, he really rapidly went through the psychological treatment, which was totally amazing. She did the EMR, the eye movement
Yeah.
treatment,
EMDR. Yeah.
and she said, find something, and we both did this together because he came home and told me, find something where you can, now that he knew how to displace his trauma, with some other thought. He had come up to Michigan to visit the kids in the summer, and he decided he was going to take a rock and throw it in the river, and that we both should do it to throw away what was going on. And he goes, nope, this isn't right. This is not the spot. I said, fine. And then as we drove down, we were hiking, and he actually made it up. We were at 3,000 feet. He made it up to 4,200 feet walking up the hill. And he turned
Great.
around and he goes, "This is it. This is the spot." I said, "I agree." He
Hmm.
accomplished something that he probably didn't do much before. Um, and we both said our words, and we threw the pebbles into the water and said, take it away with you. I can move forward." So he had a I think the most important was having a positive attitude. I got over the fear of losing him. Um, and it's going to happen. It could happen to anybody. It could happen in a car accident.
Yeah.
Um, so I accepted
There's
that.
a lot to unpack there, and I almost don't want to go too fast into some of that because we'll come to that. Not just about PTSD for the survivor, but PTSD for their partner or people who are close to them. We'll come to that in a moment, and also the attitude that you're talking about and acceptance and things like that. But um, if I'd just like to talk a little bit about what have been some of the overall challenges in your lives since this happened. Have you noticed it's dynamically changed how you live your life? Has it made you more cautious, both of you? Because a lot of people understandably become very cautious, all the way to
No.
struggling to leave the house. So and
um,
I know you've come over to Europe since this happened, haven't you?
yeah. So the initially, he's a chef. He wants to cook. He wanted to go back and teach. That was his life. And I said, that's not going to
Hmm.
happen. But I didn't tell him that. I kept that inside, and I said, okay, well, let's try to cook dinner. And, he stood at the stove and he was there for 5 minutes, and I could see it wasn't going to last long. And I said, "Would you please try something for me?" Because if I told him, it wouldn't have happened. I said, "We have a stool. Why don't you sit down and try to cook and try to dice so you can relax and take the pressure off your body?" And he did
Hmm.
that. So,
Yeah.
he would still fight with me saying, "I can take care of myself." Um, but, knowing when to push was a hard thing. Not to push is a hard thing for me.
I'm glad you've said that because straight away I'm picking up that, and I could see it could be very present in many couples. There's that sort of balance, isn't there, between how much you intervene, how much you allow the person to have their independence, their
Hmm.
own sense of kind of maybe threat that they've lost something in themselves, and so they might be extra defensive about that. And that all has to be navigated, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was tough. Because, you know, his love is teaching, which is funny because he went to culinary school and everything, but when he went there, he ended up teaching there. They hired
Hmm.
him as a teacher. So, and he's a great chef, no doubt. He's not one of the fancy ones that does the beautiful ice. Well, he does ice sculptures too, but used to. But he had a lot of great life experiences, and he is a patient human being, the total opposite of me. I'm yell, get it out, spit it out. He just keeps it internally and just mumbles his way through it. So it's learning how to deal with the difference in dynamics. I'll blow up, let it go, and he just keeps it inside until I blow up again.
Okay.
And since the dissection, he's a little more open to respond to me and say, back off, or, you know, let me do it. Let me take care of myself. Um,
It comes across to me that you both navigate that pretty well, all things considered, and a little bit of kind of isn't
yeah,
a bad thing in relationships because it shows kind of libido in its widest sense. I mean, the word, kind of life force.
yeah. What
If
was
someone's
interesting
just in a
yeah,
heap in the corner,
when we
you
first
know,
got married, His father took him inside and says, "Don't be quiet. You better talk to this woman because she won't take silence when she's mad at you."
That's quite a thing for a father to say. Yeah. Yeah.
And he was
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
So, and knowing, I think one of the other things when you're talking about trying to um, manage yourself and help them with their care, and not to overly manage them. There was one morning I looked at him and I said, "Okay, this is going to be a hospital visit." I could tell.
Okay, so tell us, this is important. These are the kind of details as well that's important for people. So
So,
given that you've got quite a bit of medical experience, as you've
yes,
demonstrated when he was in the hospital, which
right,
is, I'm learning things and words as you're talking.
yeah.
What were you seeing then?
Um, I saw his breathing not being. I saw the weakness. I saw the dizziness. He sat in the chair, and he goes, "And I got to rest a minute." I went, "Okay." And then I said, "Let's take your blood pressure."
Hmm.
And he did his blood pressure, and his heart rate was. He has a low heart rate, anyways, which will, normally it's 54. As he
Okay.
took his blood pressure, it was 46 and erratic. I go, "That's it. We're going to the hospital." He goes, "We'll wait a little longer." And because I know hospitals, I inspected them. I said, "You got to go to the hospital. You got to be there before 11." He
Yep.
goes, "Why?" I says, "Because you won't get in. The lobby's going to fill up. People do wake up in the morning and said, 'Oh, I'll wait a couple hours.' You don't wait. You go." And even when we went to the front desk, I said, "He's in heart failure." She gave me a look like I was crazy. I said, "Please, I know what I'm telling you." I didn't say I was a dietitian. I didn't say anything like that. I said, "But I'm telling you, he's in heart failure." So she took him into the room, and within taking his blood pressure, he was down the hall to the ER, to the doctors.
Well done, Mindy. And the other point you make there is don't wait in those
Don't
kind of
wait.
situations. Yeah.
"Oh, I can. I'll wait a little bit longer." You can't
Yeah.
wait. Who
It's
knows what's
very
going
tempting
on?
to, of course. I know that feeling myself. I'll just see how this feels. Or you don't want to give in to it because there's a fear of kind of going, oh, here we go again or something.
Well, 10 times later in the first year, um, after that one, he pretty much said, "Okay, I need to go." We
Mm.
had a great doctor, but in by the time September, October rolled along, he goes, "Oh," every time he came in, he goes, "Oh, it's anxiety.
I
Oh,
just
it's
want to come in
anxiety."
there if I can, because I just want to go over that one more time for people about
Hmm.
signals. So we've got, take the blood pressure, which was low and erratic. And the heart rate was down even on 54, yes?
Yeah, it was down to 40 in the 40s.
Okay. And then you've got some dizziness, fatigue, and
Extreme
just
fatigue,
extreme,
shortness of
and
breath.
just that sense that we know when we know somebody of like something's just not right, not
Hmm.
themselves, huh? What about color of the skin and things?
That didn't change that much for him. Um, but we've been together over 40 years, so
Hmm,
we can tell when something's not right with either of us
sure.
before the person even knows something's wrong.
Yeah.
Um, um,
Okay.
so yeah, he's been very good. Like when we went to Europe, he did a great. He knew when to stop. He just, the first week we were on a catamaran. We went to Greece, and we were walking up to the Parthenon. Yeah, Parthenon. I can't remember. We did so much. We do so much traveling. We got there, and he looked up. The elevator was broken. He says, "I'm going back to the hotel. I can't do this.
Hmm,
You go and enjoy yourself." And I said, "I'll come back." He says, "No, you're here. Enjoy it." I went, "You got it." And I went and did it, you know.
good.
So I
And
don't,
that's good. That's sensible and mature on his part that he's recognizing his limits,
he
taking
recognizes
the
his
taking the
limits
ego out of it.
and making sure that I take care of myself as well. Don't just
Yeah.
worry about him. Go, we came here to enjoy it.
Yes.
So we did.
Good. Well, I'm glad you've given me a cue there, because one of the things I wanted to talk about is, here you are as a carer, but one of the important things for carers is, what about them? What about me? And we've touched on your own kind of PTSD.
Hmm.
Do you think sometimes there's a danger in these kind of situations in relationships? It doesn't sound like it's particularly the case in yours, but the carer becomes kind of who they are can easily become forgotten.
Yes.
Tell me more
Especially
about
because
that.
I had retired um, like 3 months before the dissection happened. I had literally had just retired because I had enough of government work. um, and um, I was always the one. I was never afraid to say, "Okay, I'm going to see the grandkids. You coming with me?" No, I have to work. Bye. You know, we were lucky in our relationship that I always made sure that I had time for me. His me was work.
Okay,
Mine was socialization.
right.
Whether it was religious socialization, playing games with friends,
Hmm.
I had always had that. So
And
initially,
you've managed to keep that going.
initially during this dissection, it was a little hard. The first 6 months
Hmm.
was a little. Luckily, I had a daughter that lived at home, so um, I didn't have to worry as much. But I go to different friends' house. We rotated houses, so we got involved in that. I was gone like Monday afternoons for 3 or 4 hours, and then Wednesday nights for 3 hours or whatever. And then we don't go out to eat. Um, and like he's cooking, and I said, honey, take a break. Let me cook. Yeah. That's his life.
Is that
And
because he thinks he's better?
different.
Okay.
That's his love message. That's his love language is cooking. So
Okay.
the cutest thing happened last week. My grandson goes, he's 10. He goes, we don't ever go out to eat anymore because Grandpa's too good of a cook. So, and that's his love
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I can live with that.
So were you conscious then, in all of this, that you also needed to take care of yourself, and that I
Absolutely.
mean, you didn't have feelings of like, oh, this isn't fair, or, I'm losing myself.
No, because I think we're both at that point. You have to go back to when we first met each other, and he was in the restaurant business. So I never saw him.
Uh-huh.
You know, my I ran a hospital food service, and they always joked because they had never met the guy, but I keep coming to work pregnant. So they finally got to meet him when I delivered the
Yeah.
kids. But in the
Yeah.
chef world, the divorce rate, we knew when we first got married that what he was doing, the divorce rate's at 70%.
I've heard that, yes.
So we
Because
made
it's a very hours intensive,
our
family,
intensive.
anti-social kind of lifestyle, isn't it?
Absolutely, because when do you go out with friends? Friday, Saturday,
Yeah.
Sunday. Well, guess when he's working? Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had always learned to find community involvement.
Okay.
And I think community is very important, whether it's friends, whether it's a religious activity, whether it's volunteering somewhere. Um,
Hmm.
you have to do that for yourself.
And were you able to download with these friends about, some of your fears and things?
Absolutely.
Because fear,
Absolutely.
all the time in this kind of work, we're always coming back to fear being the huge driver of so much.
Yeah. And
Not just with illness, but in life generally.
yeah, well, one of my
And
friends happens
d-
to
you,
be
it,
go ahead.
not
One of
only
my
that,
friends,
you've
yeah, one
touched
of my
on the
friends
fact
happens to be a
before that you
psychologist.
had fear with me.
Oh, I had fear. And one of my friends is a MSW in social work, and she had lost her husband, and they were our best friends. Um, and her husband was a sudden loss. They diagnosed him in December with pancreatic cancer, and he passed away in March that year. So it was rapid, and she didn't want any visitors, anybody coming to see him. But she allowed us to come because we don't talk, we don't do. We'll help him eat. You tell us when
Yes.
to leave, but go take a break. We'll feed him dinner
Yes. Yeah.
so that she
So,
could have her time.
so tell me a little bit more about your own self-care. I understand you've done some other things to sort of look after yourself and
Um,
cope with the
I,
emotional side
I
of
love to
this.
garden.
Hmm.
My house is on a third of an acre in Florida. Um, in the backyard, when we had rented it before we bought it, I could care less about the house. I fell in love with the backyard because it was xeriscaped with azaleas, and it was a garden. It was like going into a park. So I could
Mm,
just go out there and relax and
lovely.
leave the door open. He could call me if he needed me, but I could take a shovel and start beating something up, if I was
Hmm.
frustrated. Um, Plant something new and it would come alive. Um, I have trees that I've traveled around the United States with. One is 46 years old. It's still in Florida because I couldn't bring it this time. The other one is 40 years old. And these are trees that I put them on the moving truck, and they were
Wow.
houseplants, but they move with
Yeah.
us. And it was funny because
Yeah.
the one tree that's still in Florida, literally the house that we bought was across from the garden where the plant came from.
So not too far to move it then.
No, I
But
mean, I brought
yeah.
it back home. So, and you know, he's not the plant guy. I'm the plant person.
Hmm.
So he lets me fiddle and do what I need. And
And in the kind of pathway out of this problem, whatever
mhm,
we want to call it, is given all kinds of terms: illness, affliction, incident.
life.
Um, Life. How did you notice changes in your own emotions which bothered you? Because if we're holding fear, we're holding a lot of fear. It's going to come out some way, isn't it? It may come out in IBS. It may come out in not sleeping. It may come out in headaches. It may come out in anger.
um, More headaches, and I wouldn't tell him I used to have migraines. Um, I would get them, but I wouldn't tell him I was having them again.
Hmm.
I didn't want to burden him. I mean, I had migraines where I had to go to the ER because my body temperature would drop to into the, I don't know how you convert it, but 98.6 is normal, and my body temperature would drop to 96.
That can happen with migraines. Yes, I
Yeah,
know.
and
Yeah.
by then you're shaking and shivering and you can't function. And I was
Mm,
very light sensitive, so um,
mm.
when you work in the hospital, it's easy. You just go walk up to ER and say, "Help me." um,
Yes. Yeah.
uh, so I think one of the hardest things that happened recently is last year we did a 9,000-mile road trip, and he was driving most of the time. And I said, "No, let me drive so you can look at the beauty sometimes."
Yeah.
And then he says, "I got to pull over. My eyes are I'm blurry and dizzy. Let's go to the ER." No, honey, grumble, grumble. We really should stop at an emergency room. No. Okay, fine. It's your life. And then a month later, the same thing happened again. And I said, "Are you sure you don't want to go?" No, it already went away. And so we ended up in Detroit. And we ended our trip visiting our grandkids. And I fell. So I was at the emergency room to make sure I didn't
Uh,
break my hip. I was at an urgent care center. Um, and they don't do x rays, they only x ray arms, legs. They don't do the torso, head to torso. They don't do it. You have to go to the ER for that. Don't ask me why, but
uh,
that's what they do now. So I said, fine. And I said, where's the ER to go to? And of course, we knew it was a football week, college football weekend. So we knew which hospitals. Again, you have to have some knowledge. of
Mm, mm.
don't be afraid to call an emergency room. I think it's a really important thing. Call the emergency room and see how busy they are.
Yes.
You may think, oh, what's silly? It's the closest emergency room. If you're going by ambulance, you don't have a choice. Um, if you're a dissection patient and you've been taken by the ambulance, when they'd come to the house, they knew the closest hospital to our house, and then they go, Mr. Seltzer, which hospital would you like to go to? And he'd go, main campus, because he knew he had to go to there's two main hospitals in the community, but they have
Mm.
tons of satellite facilities. And he says, main hospital. They knew where to take them, and they didn't question it. Even though they're supposed to take you to the closest hospital.
Yeah.
So that was good. So what happened is I was at the urgent care center, and then he called, are you on your way home? Or how long are you going to be? I said, I'm on my way home now. He says, okay, because I have to go to the emergency room. Okay, what's going on? I'll see you at home. I was only a couple miles away. So my daughter's and my son-in-law's friend is the head of the emergency department in one of the hospitals. And we told him what was going on. And he said, my hospital's too busy. You can go to this one, or this one to get started. And then if we have to transfer you, we can transfer you. So we both walked into the emergency room because I had to go too. And they go, who's the patient? We both went, us. And she looked at us like, are you crazy? I said, I fell. He thinks he's having a stroke.
Gosh.
So, and I don't fall. It happened to be just stupid
Yeah.
things, stupid
Mm.
falls. I didn't I had something in front of me with my eyes were covered, and I tripped on my daughter's step. Luckily, the garbage can was there. And if you're an adult and you're older, if you hit your head, you go to the hospital. There's no questions asked.
Mm.
My head hit the soft garbage can, so I knew I didn't have to go.
You've had quite a plateful, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, and
down
so
the
he
road.
ended up going to the hospital. I got checked out, and they said, you're fine. So then I went down to his room in the ER,
Yeah.
and they admitted him. They still didn't tell me he had a stroke. And
So just run through for us the symptoms that he was displaying then, or he told. Was it
not
again the
normal.
dizzy
He
eyes?
was dizzy. He was
Mhm.
dizzy. He was losing his balance. He was seeing two of things.
Yes.
That was it.
Okay.
His blood pressure wasn't even that elevated.
Mm.
So it was like, okay, but he knew something wasn't right because he had that was the third episode that week.
Ah,
Which,
well, that's significant then, isn't it?
yes. So, it's
Yeah.
not like 1 month and another month, but he had 3 in a week.
Yeah. Mm.
So he went in, they admitted him for the day. And you have to know your medications. The caregiver has to know the spouse's medications. If I can give anything, keep the list in your purse, keep it in your phone,
Mhm.
because if they can't speak it, we are not from here, although we have communication with the medical records now. But with the medications changing so much, with the dissection, you have to be up on the medications and be able to hand them the list and say, this is what he's been taking, this is what he's already took, or she has taken, and she's
So you
already.
didn't have a card like where they just can pop it into the computer and
No,
all your
no,
details come up?
no. They have it on
That's
it's
the way it
called.
works here.
Well,
Yeah.
they have a medical. It's I can't think of the name of it all of a sudden, but it's like medical care, med chart,
Mhm.
and my chart is what it's called, and any hospital can access it.
Okay.
But sometimes you have to give it permission for that hospital to access it. And if you
Mm.
are the person and you don't know his password to get into his account, you're starting at square one all over again.
Yeah.
So the neurologist came in, which she was young, so I figured she was a fellow. And she informed him that he had a stroke, which no one had told him yet. So he wasn't real happy with that. And then she turned around and said, we're going to give you, there's a new protocol that they elevate your blood pressure to anywhere from 180 to 200 systolic so you don't throw a clot. And then they give you Plavix or one of the anticoagulants that works specifically there. And also like Lipitor.
I know what you're going to say, because Rob brought that up in his talk. So in other words, she hadn't realized that
she had not read his record.
So of course, the worst thing you can do is elevate blood pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
So he goes.
Now again, I have to say I'm surprised that if a card, if my information is on a card in the slot, my whole history comes up on the screen.
But that doesn't mean they'll read it. That's the point.
That's true.
So we were here initially when he had the dissection, about 3 months. We keep a book, a paper, a 1-inch binder with his most recent CT, with all his recent medications, and a list of his physicians if you have to contact them.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, I'm looking at the time, we can go to the next subject. Because we moved to Michigan, we have a health maintenance organization, healthcare, through the state. We had a PPO, which is a preferred provider. You can go anywhere. You don't have to ask permission. You get to go wherever you want. Well, it went from $190 a person, which is extremely reasonable. Because there's the thing we call the donut with your medications that you have to pay, but because we work for the government, we don't have to pay that. So it makes it a little easier. Well, this year, in November of 24, they raised our insurance to $400 a person. So we switched to an HMO, a health maintenance organization. You can only use a health maintenance organization where you live, the state you live in.
Okay.
I can't get it. I can't change my HMO to Michigan because it's a Florida-based health plan. So we can go to the emergency room. We can go to urgent care. So that, we're safe with that. In order to see the doctors, we have to fly back to Florida.
So that's a big obstacle then, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, the two of us to fly to Florida is $400. It's still cheaper than the month of insurance.
Okay. Yeah. So
so
there's a lot to manage,
take the risks.
isn't there? And again, I want to bring this back to you, Mindy. In the remaining time we have, you really strike me. You're impressive in the way you're so involved in this. But what about your own health and things like that?
I'm healthy.
Who looks after Mindy? Because if you were talking to me, as a therapist, I would be constantly bringing it back to you and going, but what about you? What about, how are you feeling?
I feel good. I am, I take an antidepressant. We didn't talk about that. I knew I needed it because I could not speak without crying.
Okay.
I just say hello, boom. It didn't matter who it was.
So there again, we see the shock and the fear coming out, don't we?
Yeah. So I started an antidepressant. I'm at the point I'm going to wean.
Let me just go into that a little bit, because important topics for people, because someone's having those kind of experiences, those symptoms, and they might be thinking, do I or don't I take an antidepressant? I don't want to maybe have to come off them at the end or get maybe dependent on them. But so first of all, just walk us through a little bit what being on the antidepressant you feel gave you.
One, I felt more in control of myself. I was basically, if you're crying all the time, you're not in control.
Okay.
I became less sensitive. If he said something to me, it wasn't, oh, you're doing this to me. You're punishing me. And I was able to help feel better about that. And I was sleeping better.
Right.
When he first had the dissection, my hand was on his heart all night long. You know, I did not, I had to have contact with him to know he was there.
Yes. So
So
basically, to summarize, and obviously I haven't talked to you in detail about this, but what I'm picking up is that the antidepressant, it dialed down a lot of the primary kind of fear reactions.
absolutely.
It flattened you out a bit, leveled you off, got you in a place where you could begin to kind of manage life again,
Absolutely.
which is, really what the principal aim of an antidepressant should be in the first
Hmm.
instance, to start to give people back the capacity to cope.
Hmm.
And
And
so
go ahead.
then, how long have you been taking that for?
I started, I think, in September of 22. So
Hmm.
2.5 years. And you wean up, and I'm not at full dose
Okay.
anyways. I'm only at 100 milligrams. I'm taking sertraline. I don't know what changes it in your country, but normal dose is 200. You ramp up to that. I didn't need that much.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure I can start when I get back home, talk to my doctor, start pulling it down to 75.
Is that something you'd like to do?
Well, because I have other things, and there is some connection with antidepressants and Alzheimer's,
Okay.
and I have Alzheimer's in my family.
Right. I've just lost your audio.
Did your microphone just die on you, Mindy? We'll take this moment to say hi to some people that we have in the chat while she figures this out. We've got
Okay.
Tom and Velda and Christina. Rob
Hi to
also
everybody.
jumped in. Molly and Karen and Michael Smith. Karen has a couple questions. She says,
Okay.
I would love to know more about how often caregivers think about that day. As survivors, we think about it all the time. I'm sure caregivers must feel a sense of resentment due to the changes in the home environment, future dreams, etc. How do you handle those feelings?
Well, we've been exploring that,
I know,
haven't we?
I know.
Yeah.
And then,
Um,
and one final question here. Can you share a bit more about how having to know about medications, medical conditions, allergies, etc. make you feel? Do you feel burdened or overtaxed?
Oh,
Can you hear
question.
me
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, yep, you're back.
Okay. No, it gives you a sense of control. It's no fear, it's no burden. You can do it with the person that had dissected to go through the medications. I'm more knowledgeable than most people on medications because that's what I did for 22 years, is check people's records to make sure they were being taken care of properly, they weren't over medicated, etc. Even though I'm a dietitian, long story short, I did much more than that. But Rob and I both, I mean, he became more medically knowledgeable than me, which is, he's not the typical person. I mean, he sat down at the computer, he started researching what dissection was, he learned what all the medications they were giving him. And we'd always talk about it. And that's what put him into heart failure. Because one of the medications, the pharmacist says, I can't give this to you because you're on these other drugs. And our doctor said, what does the pharmacist know? I'm the doctor.
Huh.
And then we turned around and said, I think the pharmacist knows. So 2 days later, he went and researched and called, oh, you need to stop that medication. Don't be, and I will say this, do not ever be afraid to challenge a physician. If you feel that what he's giving them, or, you don't have to be angry about it, but you can say, well, I read the insert they gave me with the medication, and I shouldn't be having this with this medication and this medication. And maybe
Yeah.
you're the caregiver, and your person you're caring for cannot express that you have to be the person doing it.
So medicines contraindicating one another is very important. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, and
So
I
having those,
totally support that. I mean, the more we know about our medications, the better. Surely, you know
yeah,
what you're
well, it
putting
makes you want
inside
to
you.
take them less. You
Yeah.
know, like I remember when I started on Lipitor, because my cholesterol was high. Of course, I've known my cholesterol since I was 17 years old. Okay, it was always 225. So they're telling me it has to be under 200, and I look at them, no, not, because I know what my baseline is. And so the doctor says 10 milligrams. I said, well, I just got back from Europe and they have 5 milligrams. Well, we don't have 5 milligrams in the United States. I said, well,
Oh, you
can I
mean you
break
don't
it
have
in
the
half?
size? You don't have the
Yeah.
size.
I go, can I break it in half? He goes, okay. And we did that for a year and it was stable. And then we had to slowly increase it.
Mm.
And I'm okay with that. If there's a need, then I would do it. So being knowledgeable about the medications, don't be afraid to ask for any handouts physicians have if you're a caregiver, and get to know I would say one thing that made us easy is knowing your pharmacist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Build a relationship with the pharmacist so they know
Because
you
they
and you
know.
know them. Yeah, that's really worked for me too.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I have a anticoagulation appointment in the morning, and I've been getting a bit of a rash on my back. Suddenly starts itching at certain times. Now it can be hives, it can be histamine, but I am going to go. I took some photographs last night. I'm going to go into just a normal routine check where you're in and out in a few barely seconds if it's stable, and I'm going to show the hematologist the photograph and say, is this linked to this particular medication? I agree, you have to push, and doctors are often very, very used to being, the quasi god, aren't they? Knowing
Absolutely.
what's best, and we do have that's the whole point about patient advocacy, isn't it? Partly
Absolutely.
what we're doing here, and particularly with the anticoagulants, which are so capricious in the way. The more we know about what interacts with them, and because it can be a bit of a minefield, the better. I
Oh,
see on some of
foods.
these forums some of the statements and the questions that are asked about the warfarin and things like that, and I'm going, no.
Can I eat spinach every day with warfarin? No. Yes, you can,
And
if they adjust the dose because you're eating it every day.
yes, yeah, and how much of it as well.
Right.
You can have a banana, maybe don't have 5.
Do you have a ripe banana or do you have a green banana?
Yes, yeah.
There's a difference.
So
Did you know you should eat a banana closer to the green side?
I didn't know that. You see, thank
Yeah.
you, Mindy.
You get more fiber from it and less
So
sugars.
as we come to approach the end, I just wanted to ask you about so we've got antidepressants in play. What
Mhm.
what are your sort of feelings about counselling for people?
About counseling people?
Counselling for people, yeah, people going for counselling.
Um, I'm for it. I mean, as a dietitian, I do the counseling.
Yes.
But one thing I recognized is that when I would meet a patient, and I'm a stubborn person, but they'd come into my office and I'd turn around and say, they go, I don't want to be here. And I could look at their records and know they definitely had to be here. I said, you know what? Let's go to a counselor. See if you go to a counselor, just one visit or two, and see if you can see what's going on.
Mm.
For whatever they're, why they overeat or whatever they did, and the majority of them would go. I don't care if it was 1 or 2 visits.
Mm.
My job is to help your life, not change your life completely.
Absolutely. Okay. Joshua, any just back to you for some more questions, contributions?
No, I think everybody was just taking it in.
Okay.
Great.
It's been lovely to have you with me, have you with us. Is there anything you'd like to close with?
As
Something
we
that
talked before,
my question is often, what makes you what makes the person or me or you joyful?
Being with my grandchildren really is a wonder.
Yes,
You know, when your grandchild turns around and says, "It doesn't take 3 days to see you anymore."
because
Like
you're in it,
I did not want to move
because
to
you're
Michigan.
close by now.
I did not want to
Yeah,
move here because my social group in life is down there. But because of the stroke, um, we
yeah.
said, okay. And until we moved, I was still fighting him. So
Well, settle in now. See
we
your
are.
grandchildren, and we wish you much joy.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been lovely
Same to
for you to
you.
share your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Mindy.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you to everybody. Don't forget to like, subscribe, get the t-shirt.